She tried to ruin everything, and I found out the stepmom's secret and no one should know. I never thought a phone call at 2:17 a.m. would quietly destroy everything I believed about my family. It was my father's lawyer. My dad had died unexpectedly 2 days earlier. Heart attack. No warning. No goodbye. We weren't extremely close, but we talked enough. He always told me, everything is taken care of. I assumed that meant bills, funeral plans, boring adult stuff. I was wrong. The lawyer asked me to come in alone. That was the first red flag. When I arrived, my stepmother wasn't there. Neither were her kids. Just me, a manila folder, and a silence so thick it felt intentional. The lawyer slid the will across the table and said, before we proceed, I need to ask you something. He asked if I had ever received money from my father. I said no. He nodded slowly, like he was confirming something he already knew. Then he said, your father changed his will 3 times in the last year. That's when my stomach dropped. According to the document, my father left me his house, his savings, and controlling interest in a small business I didn't even know he still owned. My stepmother was listed, but only as a temporary occupant of the house, with a strict deadline to leave. Her children weren't mentioned at all. I asked the obvious question, why? The lawyer didn't answer immediately. He pulled out a second folder, thicker, older, filled with notes, emails, and something handwritten that made my hand shake. Your father told me, he said carefully, that if anything happened to him, you deserve the truth, but only if you were ready to hear it. I wasn't, because the first document on top wasn't financial. It was a private investigation report, and my stepmother's name was on every single page. The investigator's report wasn't about cheating. That's what I expected. That's what would have made sense. Instead, the first page said, subject suspected of long-term financial manipulation and identity concealment. I looked up at the lawyer, waiting for him to tell me this was a mistake. He didn't. He just folded his hands and said, your father hired the investigator after noticing irregular withdrawals. According to the report, my stepmother had been slowly draining accounts that weren't hers. Small amounts at first, always just under the radar. Grocery money, house expenses, emergency transfers. Over 5 years, it added up to hundreds of thousands. But that still wasn't the worst part. The investigator discovered she had a second identity. Different last name. Different date of birth. Different marital history. She had been married before, twice. One husband disappeared. The other died under unclear circumstances. Both times, she walked away with property. My dad never knew. Or at least, not until the last year of his life. There were emails printed in the file. Messages my father sent the investigator late at night. Fearful. Confused. Angry. One line was underlined in red. I don't think she married me for love. I think I was a plan. I remembered how she cried at the funeral. Loud. Dramatic. Holding on to the coffin like she might collapse. Everyone said she was devastated. The report painted a different picture. It included photos of her meeting someone in parking lots, bank records linked to offshore accounts, and one note from the investigator that made my chest tighten. Recommend subject relocate assets immediately. Client may be at risk. At risk. 2 weeks later, my father was dead. I asked the lawyer the question I didn't want the answer to. Do you think she killed him? The lawyer paused, then said, we don't have proof of that. That wasn't a no. Before I could process any of this, my phone buzzed. A message from my stepmother. We need to talk. Today, she arrived calm. Too calm. No tears. No shaking hands. No fake grief. She sat across from me at the kitchen table like she owned the place. Like this wasn't the house my father warned me about before he died. I know you've been talking to lawyers, she said softly. People are filling your head with nonsense. I didn't answer. I slid the investigator's report across the table. Her eyes dropped to the pages. For exactly 3 seconds. Then she smiled. That man was paranoid at the end, she said. You know how sick he was. That's when I realized something terrifying. She wasn't scared. Not even a little. She didn't deny the accounts. Didn't deny the fake name. Didn't even ask how I got the report. Instead, she leaned forward and said, your father wanted me to manage things. He trusted me. I pointed to the highlighted line. I think I was a plan. Her smile vanished. Do you know what happens to families that tear each other apart over money? She asked. They lose everything. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a single document. A property transfer agreement. My name was on it. She wanted me to sign away partial ownership of the house, my house, so she could, temporarily, use it as collateral. For legal reasons, she said. Just until things settle. I laughed. A short, ugly laugh. You think I'm stupid? She tilted her head. I think you're grieving. And grieving people make mistakes. That's when she dropped the bomb. She knew about my debt. My old credit issues. The mistake I made years ago that almost ruined my life. I helped your father cover that up, she said. I protected you. That was a lie. But it was a dangerous one. If you don't sign, she continued, I stop protecting you. And certain people start asking questions. My hands were shaking now. This wasn't about money. This was blackmail. I stood up and told her to leave. She gathered her things slowly, then paused at the door. Oh, she said casually. One more thing. She turned back, eyes cold. Your father didn't die suddenly. I didn't sleep that night. Her last sentence kept replaying in my head like a broken alarm. Your father didn't die suddenly. At 3:17 a.m., I finally got up and went to the garage. That's where my father kept everything he didn't want anyone else touching. Old tools, boxes of paperwork, and one locked metal cabinet I was never allowed to open when he was alive. I broke the lock. Inside were folders, dozens of them. Bank statements, handwritten notes, and a small digital voice recorder wrapped in cloth. My hands were sweating when I pressed play. At first, just static. Then my father's voice. Tired. Weak. Afraid. If anything happens to me, he said. It wasn't natural. I felt my stomach drop. He talked about money disappearing months before his death. About my aunt handling transfers. Temporarily. About confronting her, and how she reacted. She told me accidents happen, he whispered. She said stress can stop a heart. I had to pause the recording to breathe. Then came the part that made my blood turn cold. She's using your name, he said. Your identity. Your old debt. If you don't protect yourself, they'll come after you, not her. That's when I understood. The reason she wasn't scared. The reason she wanted my signature. The reason she came so calmly. She wasn't trying to steal from me. She was trying to frame me. The next morning, I went to the bank. I asked for a full audit on every account connected to my name. The clerk's face changed as she typed. There are transactions here, she said slowly, from accounts you supposedly controlled years ago. Years ago, when I was broke. When my credit was destroyed. When I barely survived. I felt sick. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll finish what your father started. Attached was a photo. My house. Taken from across the street. Someone was watching me. The police showed up that afternoon. 2 officers. Calm. Polite. But their questions weren't. They said my stepmother had reported suspicious behavior. Claimed I'd been unstable since my father's death. That I was obsessed with his money. That I'd threatened her during a private conversation. None of that was true. But they had something worse. A printed bank report showing withdrawals tied to my name, transfers I never made, dated back years. Same timeline as my credit collapse. Same pattern as the investigators' report. Someone had been using me as a financial shield. I told them about the recorder. They listened. One officer's jaw tightened when my father's voice said, If anything happens to me, it wasn't natural. They didn't promise anything. Just said they'd look into it. That night, my stepmother posted online a long emotional message about grief, about being betrayed by family, about how she feared for her safety. Comments flooded in, calling her brave, calling me heartless, dangerous. My phone exploded. Friends stopped replying. Then I got a call from the lawyer. Your father added a clause, he said quietly. If any beneficiary attempted coercion or fraud, everything would freeze, and evidence would be released automatically. I asked the question I was afraid to ask. Released to who? Police, banks, and the IRS. There was silence. Then he added, "The trigger activates if you're charged with anything." That's when it hit me. She wasn't just trying to steal. She was trying to force me into taking the fall, so she could walk away clean. At midnight, my security camera alerted me. Someone was in my backyard, standing near the garage, holding something metallic. I didn't confront whoever was in my backyard. I locked myself in the bedroom and watched the security feed on my phone, heart pounding so hard, I thought it might give me away. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, straight toward the garage door, the same place I'd found the recorder. They knew. Seconds later, the motion light snapped on. The person froze, then looked straight up at the camera. It was her son, my stepbrother. He stood there for a moment, staring, then calmly raised his hand and waved, like this was a misunderstanding. Like he hadn't just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I called the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone. But the footage was clear. Clear enough that the officers exchanged looks they couldn't hide. The next morning, my stepmother called me, screaming. She said I'd ruined everything. That her son was just checking on the house. That families don't call the cops on each other. I didn't respond. Instead, I went back to the lawyer's office. That's where I learned the part she never expected me to find. The investigator's report had an addendum, sealed unless something escalated. It detailed a pattern. Every time one of her previous husbands started questioning finances, every time assets were about to be frozen, something happened. Accidents, sudden illnesses, legal distractions aimed at someone else. And always, a family member left holding the blame. My father wasn't her first plan. He was just the one who figured it out too late. The lawyer looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you disappear from this process, she wins." As I left the office, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Last chance. Sign the papers, or the story ends with you. Attached was a document draft. This time, it wasn't about property. It was a confession, written in my name. I stared at the draft on my phone. It was her masterpiece, a confession in my name admitting financial fraud, threats, and mismanagement. One signature and I would be the criminal. She would walk away untouched. I sat frozen. My mind raced. My father's voice from the recorder echoed. "If anything happens to me, protect yourself. Don't trust anyone." I knew I couldn't go to the police without proof she was orchestrating everything. But the proof was here, scattered across years. The investigators' notes, the hidden accounts, the voice recordings, the surveillance footage, and my own bank records. Then, I remembered something. One detail buried in the report. She always underestimated the children of previous marriages. They were kept away from her schemes, treated as pawns or tools. Her son tonight wasn't just visiting the house. He was sent to test me. See if I'd panic break, or do something that would force me to sign. I decided to flip the script. I called my childhood friend, someone who had always helped me navigate family chaos. I walked him through everything, gave him access to the footage and the documents. His eyes widened, then he nodded slowly. "You need to bait her," he said. "Make her think she has the upper hand. But we control the narrative." That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I saw her car outside. She was here. I stepped outside calmly, holding a folder. "Here," I said casually. "I've already signed it." Her eyes narrowed. "You what?" I opened the folder. Empty. "Sign nothing," I said. "But you've been recorded, photographed, and documented for everything you've ever done. Any attempt to manipulate me, anyone, or the law triggers automatic release." Her lips trembled. She realized I wasn't the naive target she had assumed. And that's when she made her first real mistake. She lunged toward me, trying to snatch the folder. I held it higher. Police sirens wailed. My friend had called them remotely as backup. She froze. I saw the moment she understood her empire of lies was crumbling. But the game wasn't over. The police didn't arrest her that day. That surprised me. Instead, they separated us and started asking very specific questions. Questions she wasn't prepared for. about bank transfers, about the garage, about why her son was on my property at midnight. She tried to cry, tried the widow routine again. It didn't work. One officer pulled me aside and said quietly, "You're not in trouble. But whatever this is, it's bigger than we thought." 2 days later, the story broke inside the family. My stepmother called an emergency meeting. Everyone came, relatives, cousins, even people I hadn't seen in years. She wanted witnesses. Pressure. Control. She spoke first. She told them I was unstable, that I was obsessed with money, that grief had changed me. She even claimed my father feared me near the end. Then she handed out copies of partial bank statements, carefully edited ones, showing my name. That's when I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I connected my phone to the TV. First, I played the recording of my father's voice. The room went silent. Then I showed the full investigator's report, every page, every alias, every marriage, every account. I showed the timestamps proving the withdrawals happened while I was living in a different state. Faces changed. Gasps. Whispers. Someone asked her if it was true. She snapped. She screamed that none of them understood. That she earned everything. That my father was weak. That families are built on survival, not fairness. That outburst was her undoing. Because my aunt, who had stayed quiet the entire time, stood up and said, "I've been waiting years for someone to finally say it out loud." She wasn't alone. Another relative admitted they'd been pressured to lie. Another said money had gone missing years ago. Patterns emerged in real time. By the end of the night, no one was sitting near her. She left alone. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls from the lawyer. He was breathless. "She's filing motions, trying to challenge the will, claiming you manipulated your father." I almost laughed. "Manipulated him?" I whispered to myself. "She's the one who built an empire of lies." But the lawyer wasn't joking. She had already contacted multiple family members, trying to get signatures, testimonies, and affidavits in her favor. I realized then she wasn't just desperate, she was dangerous. By noon, news came that she had left the city. Her car gone. No forwarding address. The authorities had reports she might be heading out of state. I checked my security cameras again. At 3 a.m., a van had been parked across the street for hours. Nobody saw it leave. Then came a knock at my door. A familiar face from my father's business. Someone I trusted implicitly. "You need to see this," he said, handing me a USB drive. On it, video files. Hidden cameras she'd installed in my father's home years ago. Every conversation. Every financial discussion. Every threat she had made. She had documented everything, trying to build her own narrative. I sat down. And for the first time, I smiled. Because the evidence now didn't just protect me. It destroyed her story completely. I handed the USB to the lawyer. He looked at me, astonished. "This is exhaustive. There's no way she can come back from this." But just as relief started to seep in, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "You think this is over? You have no idea. She has allies." I froze. Allies? Who could possibly help someone like her? Then I remembered something buried deep in the investigator's notes. A connection to someone I never expected. A former employee of the company my father owned. Someone still holding grudges for a decade-old betrayal. And that's when I understood the war wasn't over. It was just getting personal. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Media outlets had caught wind of the story. A dramatic inheritance dispute, a manipulative stepmother, secret recordings, and allegations that could ruin reputations. She arrived dressed perfectly calm, poised, smiled at the cameras as if she owned the narrative. I sat across from her, holding my folder of evidence. My lawyer whispered, "Stay calm. Let's do this smart." The judge called the session to order. She went first. Her voice was confident, convincing. She claimed I had pressured my father into giving me the house, manipulated documents, and coerced him in his final days. She even presented edited screenshots of my text messages to make me look guilty. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't react. Then my lawyer stood. He systematically laid out everything: the investigator's report, my father's recordings, hidden bank accounts, surveillance footage, and proof of her aliases. The courtroom watched in disbelief as each lie she had told over the years unraveled one by one. Her smile faded. She tried to interject, to argue, but the judge wasn't buying it. Every claim she made had already been disproven. Then came the turning point. My lawyer handed the judge the USB drive with hidden camera footage from my father's home. The judge watched, silent at first. Then, suddenly, the room seemed to shrink as she played a clip showing my stepmother admitting, in her own words, that she manipulated accounts, misused my name, and planned to control the inheritance. Gasps filled the room. She froze. Finally, the judge slammed the gavel. Based on the evidence presented, all claims against the primary heir are dismissed. The will is valid. Any attempt to interfere further will have severe legal consequences. She sat down, shocked, defeated. But the fight wasn't over entirely. Her allies, the ones mentioned in the last message, were still out there, waiting. And I realized something chilling. She hadn't been defeated yet, just delayed. That night, I stayed up, scanning the house, checking cameras, and reviewing every document. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. You think the courtroom settled this? Think again. Someone in your family is on her side. I froze. My mind raced. Who could it be? Cousins? Aunts? My father's old business partners? I dug through emails, messages, and old letters. And then I found it. A long-forgotten email from my late father to his accountant. A warning about my uncle. My father suspected him of secretly helping my stepmother funnel money. He never confronted him, and my uncle had been quiet ever since. I realized my fight wasn't just against my stepmother. It was against a network, carefully placed over years, designed to manipulate, control, and intimidate. The next morning, my stepmother sent another message. Sign what we agreed on, or your uncle faces consequences. That's when it hit me. She was using family ties as leverage, counting on me to crumble under pressure. I had a choice. Option 1, panic, sign, and lose everything my father built. Option 2, play the long game, expose the entire network, and finally take back control. I chose the second. I contacted the lawyer and shared the email and the connections. We traced funds, messages, and digital footprints. It became clear. My stepmother had been orchestrating a financial empire using unsuspecting family members. Within days, the police reopened investigations. Banks froze accounts. Auditors were called in. My stepmother's allies panicked. And then, the final shock came. A distant cousin I trusted, someone I had grown up with, tried to warn her about my evidence. He didn't know I had recorded the call. The betrayal was real. But it didn't matter. Every move she made, every ally she called, was now tracked. I finally felt a sense of control I never thought I would. Weeks passed, but finally, everything came together. The investigators had collected irrefutable proof. My stepmother's financial manipulation, her fake identities, and her alliances were all exposed. Her attempts to use family members as pawns were documented in emails, recordings, and bank trails. The day the court reconvened, she walked in confident, as if nothing could touch her. Then the judge spoke. Based on overwhelming evidence, all claims by the defendant are dismissed. Any further attempts to intimidate or manipulate the primary heir will result in immediate criminal prosecution. She sat, stunned, silence replacing her bravado. But that wasn't the best part. The real shock came when her allies, those she had counted on, turned on her. One by one, they confessed their part in the schemes. Her son, realizing the truth, refused to testify for her. Even my cousin, who tried to warn her, admitted he had acted under her pressure. The courtroom was silent. Every lie, every manipulation, crumbled like a house of cards. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse alone. No one followed me. No threats. No whispers. Just the crisp wind on my face, and for the first time in years, peace. I finally understood what my father meant in the recording. Protect yourself, but always stay true. The truth is the strongest weapon. My home, my inheritance, my life, no one could touch it anymore. I realized something deeper. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, survival, honesty, and courage define the bond. And as I looked back at the courthouse one last time, I whispered to myself, some battles you never asked for. Some wars you inherit. But the truth always wins in the end. Whoa, that was wild. I need to know what shocked you the most in this story. Was it her secret identities? The midnight break-ins? Or that crazy courtroom twist? Drop your honest reactions in the comments. I promise I'm reading every single one, and I want to know what blew your mind. If you love this story and want more jaw-dropping, unbelievable tales like this, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe. We've got even crazier stories coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single one. Also, tell me, if you were in this situation, what would you do? Could you have stayed calm like our main character, or would you have cracked? Comment below, and let's see who's brave enough to handle this chaos. Thanks for sticking with me until the end. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story. Don't forget, the next one might be even crazier.